Hello, and welcome to Privacy News Today, brought to you by Termageddon.com. We're an auto-updating privacy policy generator, so obviously we keep track of privacy news as well. And today we'll be talking about a fine that was recently issued to wireless carriers. The fine was $200 million, and it was issued to the main wireless carriers for privacy violations. I did want to note that the information that we talk about today is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. So, what happened here? So, the U.S. Federal Communications Commission fined major wireless carriers like AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon about $200 million because they illegally shared access to customers' location data. So your wireless carrier will collect geolocation data about you. So that data will reveal your real-time locations, and it could potentially expose very sensitive information about you. So for example, let's say you are going to church and you're bringing your phone, or you're going to a protest, or you're going to a doctor's office. The geolocation data from your phone that is being collected by these carriers can expose really, really sensitive information about customers because it exposes where you are at any given time. It can also lead to safety issues. So, for example, like if you have a stalker or something like that who wants to hurt you, they can know where you are at any given point in time. So there was an investigation that took place, and it found that these wireless carriers are selling access to this information to aggregators. Basically, aggregators take a lot of data about consumers and put it together, and then they resell this data to third-party location-based service providers. So basically, these are service providers that rely on knowing where a particular individual is at any given time. Now, this could happen with law enforcement, it could happen with businesses, anybody who's really interested in your location. Now, the sale happened without consumer consent in most cases. And actually, the investigation found that once the carriers knew that this information was not being adequately protected and the safeguards were not effective that were applied to that information, they continued to sell this information anyway to make additional profits. Now, why were they actually fined? Why is this in violation of the law? So, Section 222 of the Communications Act requires these wireless carriers to take reasonable measures to protect customer information. Now, before the wireless carrier can use, disclose, or allow access to this information or sell the information to a third party, they're required to obtain affirmative express consent of that customer. Now, what the investigation found was that the carriers were selling this information to aggregators without consent, and they were putting the onus on the aggregators to obtain consent from that customer to resell that information to the people that were actually using it. But what the investigation found was that these aggregators, in most cases, were not obtaining express consent before reselling that information. And the carriers knew this and continued selling that information to them. So, this investigation initially started when there were public reports that customers' location information was being disclosed by the carriers without the customer's consent. And the report found that it was initially resold to Missouri Sheriff, who used that information to track the location of multiple people without their consent and without a warrant. It's unclear whether or not these individuals that were tracked were being suspected of a crime or they were previously incarcerated or why they were being tracked. So after the reports became public, the wireless carriers continued to sell this location data without making sure that consent was obtained from individuals for the sale in violation of the Communications Act. So if you are using one of these wireless carriers, it is possible that your information was sold and then resold to these entities that were tracking this information without your consent. So it'll be really interesting to see what the FCC does next after this fine is imposed. and what the wireless carriers will be doing as well. So are they going to stop selling this information? Are they going to try to find ways around this rule, or what's going to happen? So that's the deal behind the $200 million fine from the FCC.